All right, it is 9:22. We're going to shift gears a little bit to March Madness. I know we kind of just are going to switch gears into this more lighter story. So if you're joining us on 13 Plus, we're going to start talking about bracketology as March Madness is here. In fact, you have like a couple hours until you have to get those picks in. Me and Amber actually had our picks done before the show here. So if you filled one out, we do have an expert to help you tell you your odds. Michigan State University's Albert Cohen is an expert in sports analytics. Good afternoon. Good morning. Sorry, we just went through a whole bunch of stuff there. Good morning, Albert. We really appreciate your time this morning. Let's start with bracketology. What is it, and how does statistics help with it?
Good morning, and of course, my thoughts go to everybody affected today. So, bracketology is essentially the science of trying to predict outcomes, especially in sequence, leading to the right championship or the right champion. Sorry.
And so, how do we use that to kind of predict our brackets here?
Well, essentially, going into the tournament, you've got these seedings that are determined by the NCAA, and the question is, how confident are you on those seedings? Do you have any extra information that you feel would help you to determine maybe an upset? And there are some historical upsets that I've been looking at that are actually quite interesting. For example, if you look at the number one seed from 85 to 2024, so notwithstanding the COVID year, 25 of those champions have been number one seeds and 5 have been number two seeds. But interestingly, the lowest seed to win a championship has been a number 8. But between, let's see here, 9, 10, and 11, there's also been some Final Four appearances. But the number 11 seed has been to the Final Four 5 times. So if you're looking for possible upsets, at least to get to the Final Four, and then after that, who knows, 11 seeds look pretty interesting to me.
Okay, so the 11 seed sounds like maybe you might want to pick that for a little bit of an upset. So can you name a team? Like what team, for example, would that be?
Don't have one off the top of my head, but as far as the number 2 seed going, I mean, I have to go with Michigan State.
I was going to say, yeah, of course, you work for Michigan State. That makes sense. So let's just say, can this data help predict a perfect bracket, or is it really just luck, or is there really some sort of science behind it? Because, I mean, these games can be so unpredictable, especially with March Madness.
Absolutely. So if you look at, for example, there are 64 teams, so there's going to be 63 total games. So if you were to flip a coin 63 total times, 2 to the power of 63 is roughly 9.4 billion. So trying to estimate, that one bracket out of 9.4 billion just randomly is going to be hard. So you're going to have some sort of information that helps you to make some of those picks.
So it's really important then to kind of really look at the statistics, though. If you're going to put your bracket together, you want to have a winning bracket. It's really important, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. I mean, I'm one of those people that will just take a bracket and pick the different colors and be like, okay, I like this team's uniform better than this team. So you should count me out on winning any sort of bracket pool.
I'm really interested in the data behind this. I don't think I understand much of it either, but how do you use that data to even predict an upset specifically? So you have all these seeds, but how do you say, yeah, I think 11 is going to beat out somebody that is technically favored to win instead?
Well, last year, if you look at a team like Oakland University, so keeping it within Michigan, their team leadership really gelled through the tournament. And of course, you're going to have to make some really good shots. You're going to have some luck on your side. But in some of the research we're doing, we're looking, for example, at soccer. Soccer is a great sport because scoring is nowhere near what it is in basketball or even in baseball. A 0-0 game is quite common. But what you're seeing is a lot of passing within the game. And that passing leads to an estimate of how connected that team is. And so if you can look at, for example, coming into the tournament, did you have a couple leaders emerge? Did you have a very well-connected team, a team that's going to fight for each other? And I have to say, Izzo's team looks like that this year.
Okay.
So that's what I'd be looking for.
Yeah, number 2 seed, Michigan State, yes. Being that, you think about Michigan State and their legacy in basketball and just how well they have done historically, but also Coach Izzo. He's a consistent face, a consistent coach there. He consistently coaches and has done throughout the years. I think it does make sense, expecting Michigan State to do very well. So, yeah, I would think that a lot of people would want to have MSU go a little bit further on their brackets than some other folks might. Let's talk about the Moneyball approach. You, in a press release we got from Michigan State, you cited the movie Moneyball. Of course, everyone knows about the Moneyball theory if you've watched the movie. How does that apply? First of all, what is it, and how does that apply to March Madness?
Moneyball theorem is probably my first thing I talk about in any of my sports analytics classes. So it's essentially a way for you to look at macro statistics. So your season-long scoring and defense, and that's a really good predictor of what your season-long winning percentage is. And so in a nutshell, that Moneyball theorem can also be related to what's called these ELO ratings. So ELO, if you look at 538 and other websites, basically these ratings are a way for me to predict, based on the quality of your play, your rating, the likelihood of you beating an opponent that maybe you've never seen before. And so the Moneyball theorem is also really useful for valuing contracts, which is a small plug. At MSU, we've developed a class for pricing contracts for athletes. This is something really new. We're using tools from quantitative finance and actuarial science, which is my other job here. So the Moneyball theorem is essentially a way for us to not only predict the quality of play, but also connecting with ELO ratings, the possibility of you winning a game against somebody that otherwise you have no matchup history with.
Interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very intrigued by this because the stats side of it, like I've seen that before. I'm
Right.
not familiar with basketball nearly as much as I should be to be filling out one of these brackets. Did it anyway, but still, how are those seeds all determined though at the beginning of all of this?
That's a really good question, and I don't know how transparent it is. I think it's sort of like in football where you probably have a committee. I should know this. Part of that lack of knowledge on my part is that I'm not a gambling kind of guy. And a lot of my friends look at me weird because this is the kind of stuff I do for my research, but I just personally not as invested in it. So that sort of objectivity kind of helps me to think about these things from a distance, but I really should know, and I don't.
Well, I mean, I think it kind of goes to your point that looking at the statistics is very important because a lot of how the seeds are chosen is all just really up to the committee, right? And how they perform throughout the year. So when you're looking at the bracketology, I mean, the statistics are going to be that much more important as opposed to what the seeds are looking at. And that's why you're pointing to, some of the, like the two seeds like MSU, looking at their stats, that's why they're a little more likely. So can you kind of explain what stats people should look at when they're filling out that bracket?
Again, color of the mascot, if you like the Blue Devils, or green as in Spartans. But all kidding aside, I personally would look at momentum going into the tournament. I think that, that's one of the things that's most important to me. Momentum and also distribution of scoring. Are you having players that are stepping up, that are spreading the ball around the court? These are the kind of things that interest me. And just to go back to that point of, who's deciding the rankings, in academia and also in sort of, associated, sports information sites, there are multiple ways to rank teams. And so I think at some point you kind of have to say, well, this is the ranking system that I feel more comfortable with. And maybe I'm going to use that to say that somehow the NCAA rankings maybe are different than what I think they should be. And that's how I'd maybe lead, at least for the first round, in picking possible upsets.
Okay. What stats or can stats, well, I guess, putting the upsets, I think people want to know where they can predict that upset. What is the best stat, or does it really matter when it comes to predicting the best upsets? Is there a stat that you can look at either way and say, yep, that's going to be your upset?
I think, strength of schedule and also your overall winning percentage coming into the tournament is important. Free throw shooting, because at the end of the day, we all remember Middle Tennessee State,
Yep.
MSU coming in really highly ranked. But that ranking goes out the window when you have a team that's just making threes and you're not.
Yeah. I'm curious though, because you teach a class on this, obviously. Do you guys do a bracket challenge for yourself, and how accurate does that usually turn out being?
That's a great question. So last night, our sports analytics club at MSU had a bracketology festival, and they filled out. And let's see how they compete. I think they're on the ESPN challenge, I believe. And it's another small plug. We actually have our first annual MSU Sports Analytics Club conference Sunday, April 6th, here on campus. And so we'll be able to, see who actually won their bracket, by that time, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, some of the things that they were looking at are probably, Michigan State attracts students from around the country. So maybe some of them were more, partial to their hometown teams. That's a good question. We'll see.
All right. Yeah, we'll see. Definitely. I need you to keep track of that and then let us know whenever someone's bracket gets busted or,
Ooh, yeah.
later on in the tournament if someone ends up winning it all. Well, I have another question. We filled out one for our station here,
Yes.
right? Me and
Yeah.
Amber both did. Is it better to make one bracket or fill out multiple? I mean, obviously the odds are probably grow at that point. And again, I'm talking about odds. It's not my strong suit, but I'm just curious if that matters or not.
Definitely, it's like any kind of investment theory. You want to hedge your bets, but there are also prop bets. From what I understand, again, I'm not a gambling person, but there are prop bets. So one interesting thing would be to track, whose bracket survived the longest, because it essentially, the chances are very much against you getting a perfect bracket. But it is neat to see who lasts the longest before their bracket is busted. That's an interesting side consideration.
Yeah. All right. Just one last question for you. We've got about 20
Sure.
seconds left with you. What would you say what's your number one advice when filling out a bracket?
Be hopeful, but be realistic.
There you go.
I like that.
That's some good advice. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and good luck in the tournament there if you filled out your own bracket, which I'm sure you did.
Thank you, and as always, go green.
All right. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go white, I guess.